My name is Doug McVay, and I'm the Director of Research for Common Sense for Drug Policy. Our business office is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we also have offices in Los Angeles, California, and Washington, D.C.
Could you tell me a little bit about your illness?
Sure. I was diagnosed in October 2003 with the seminoma variety of germ cell or testicular cancer.
What was that like for you? Tell me about that experience a little bit, if you could, please.
Well, it was very frightening. My symptoms weren't typical. In fact, I didn't have most of the typical symptoms. I didn't notice there was anything wrong until I was experiencing abdominal pain from a tumor which had metastasized there. And as I was under stress at the time, I simply wrote that off as stress-induced. When it persisted for several months, it became obvious that that wasn't the case, and so eventually I went in and began the process of getting the diagnosis. That process actually lasted a good month or so, trying to get a biopsy. When that one failed, going in for a surgical biopsy, and then getting the results. And after I got the results, there was a week of testing to determine whether I was healthy enough to be able to take a more aggressive form of the treatment. I was, fortunately. I already wasted down to, when I got my diagnosis, I weighed 132 pounds. By the time I began my chemo, I was down to 128. Fortunately, though, I was able at that point to impose upon people who I knew when I got my diagnosis. I was able to acquire adequate amounts of medical grade cannabis so that I could start eating again. And it seemed to work. During 3 cycles of chemotherapy, I was able to put on 14 pounds, 148 to 142. So I experienced quite a lot of nausea, but I was able to keep everything mostly under control. There were also quite a few pain issues. I was able to use the cannabis for that. I was prescribed some opiates and other painkillers. I tried to avoid using them, in part because my system just doesn't handle opiates well. Usually they make me nauseated, so I didn't want to do that. After surgery, I was taking them as necessary, but still there too, I preferred not to. The cannabis just worked much better. And then as far as the nausea, I had during 3 cycles, 63 days. I had 3 breakthrough, there's 3 points when I actually became nauseated and vomited, which is really very little. It's really very little, and mostly because it was the middle of the night, and frankly, I just didn't have the strength to get up and medicate. I just didn't have I just couldn't, and so I just couldn't do anything about it until it was already happening. It's kind of a drag.
So where are you now as far as with the cancer?
I'm quite a lot healthier in many respects, actually. My diet's much better. I'm paying attention to that sort of thing, remaining physically active. The surgery and chemotherapy, the chemotherapy finished after, at the end of December of '03. The surgery was a couple of months rather later. Then long period of becoming healthy, and for just the last year and 5 months, I've been more or less officially in remission, and all my blood work is good. I have a couple of issues with anemia and some other things post-chemo. Basically, post-chemo, my system is a little messed up, and a combination probably of the cancer, but also mostly from the chemo. I have some issues, and but they're all under control. And I go in for blood testing every 3 months and I've had CTs every 6 months for the past few years now. So, since '05. So,
How much do you think the cannabis had to do with your recovery?
well, quite a lot, if only because, like I say, I'd wasted down to 128 when I started my chemo, but I was able to eat because I was consuming cannabis. I should explain, I tried some of the prescription appetite stimulants, one in particular, Megace, I remember was just awful. I took the stuff and then was just weak as a kitten and nauseated for a couple of hours. And that's not what you want in an appetite stimulant. And it was just awful. I mean, that was one of the reasons I lost 4 pounds between my diagnosis and beginning chemo, was because I was on that stuff. And I called the doc and said, it's just not working. I threw it away. I just couldn't do it. He was actually disappointed to hear I'd thrown it away, because he said, well, sometimes these things, take time to work. Like, a couple of weeks possibly before I'll really start noticing the effects. And I really didn't have a couple of weeks.